All right. Welcome to the console room. What is it called? Lost and Found panel. What?
Episodes. Lost and Found episodes.
Okay, if you're not on the panel, can you go on mute, please? All right, just
It's
kidding.
gonna be one of those panels.
Welcome to the Lost and Found missing episode panel. We always have to have one of these, or it's not a Doctor Who convention. I am Bill Evenson. I like Doctor Who. I like the missing ones. I like the found ones. It's a good show. Robert.
Yes, my name is Robert Franks. I've been a Doctor Who fan since 1982, as long as Jeff has been alive. And I have in the past been involved with making and distributing Doctor Who reconstructions and editing the fanzine Nothing at the End of the Lane.
I have no such credentials, but I am Jeff Elston, and I have been a Doctor Who fan for almost as long as I have been alive, since later in the 80s. I was never involved in distributing reconstructions, though that is how I originally met Robert, was talking about doing that. So, and like Bill, I love the Lost episodes. I love the Found episodes. So I'm just a big Doctor Who fan. So excited to talk about the perennial fan favorite topic of missing episodes.
Excellent. Let's start off, as any good missing episode panel should, by trying to understand, why are there missing episodes? Jeff, why are there missing episodes of Doctor Who?
Because the BBC junked them. It was very common practice at the time. They didn't have a lot of rerun value, almost no rerun value. And so they were just wiped. They were seen once, maybe twice. And then it was like, well, we don't need these anymore. So we'll just get rid of them, much to fans' dismay later down the line. So
okay, I'm biting my tongue because that's...
Yeah,
that
I was going to say, now for the rebuttal.
It's hugely misrepresentative also. So there's nothing untrue about what you've said, but it's more to do with the fact that, obviously the world was a different thing back then, back in the 60s and 70s, and there wasn't such a thing as home media. It did not exist yet. The reruns were handled in a much different way in the UK to how they were handled in the US because of different actors unions. And the biggest factor in why there are missing episodes that I think still confuses American fans, because they don't understand television in the British concept, is the BBC itself. Even if there had been home video back then, the BBC itself is a government-funded entity, which is by its own charter not allowed to make money. They produce programs from the money they are given from the government, which come from the television licenses and so forth, but they aren't allowed to make their own money. So early on in the early days of the BBC, they came up with, well, we've made this product, we should be able to sell it to other broadcasters overseas. But in order to do that, they had to set up a separate entity. That entity at the time was called BBC Enterprises. And today, I'm not even sure what if it's called Worldwide or not anymore, but basically that entity has evolved over the years. But there were two separate companies. And that was one of the main reasons that led to a lot of this, is that although you had BBC Television that was making episodes, once they made them and they were only allowed to repeat them, they would have to, or repay the actors and the musicians to repeat the episodes in the UK, which didn't happen often back in those days. They really were done and over with the episodes. There wasn't anything more they could do with them. So there was the engineering department stance to, they kept a library of the episodes at the time. There was also a film library that kept film elements, but as far as the episodes are done, they were done with them. Then BBC Enterprises would come in and get copies. Those copies would go to, they are the ones who ordered the telerecordings to be made in most cases, and that those telerecordings are then what they sold around the world. And they made money. They made a profit from selling those series. That money then went back into the BBC to fund new programs. But the BBC itself was not allowed to make that money. They had to have a separate entity do that and funnel the money back to them. Again, you can talk about like tax evasion and all of that separately, but the it all gets into, well, it's rather complicated, but basically it's two companies. It's very similar to now, does anybody at Disney really know all of the things that all of their umbrella like companies are making or handling? Does any one person at the top manage all of that? No, it's, they've set up all of these different companies and they're all making separate content that are getting out to the public. But
and that's that point in history, because prior to Doctor Who, the BBC primarily aired royal coronations and U.S. presidential assassination coverage. I think that was their remit. Stop
trying to be funny, Bill. Not useful on a missing episode panel. But basically, that's the real reason why this happened. I mean, there's a lot of other details to it, much as you said, Jeff, that because of the actors unions and that they couldn't repeat things in the UK, BBC Enterprises was selling them around the world, which is why many of these episodes have now come back to us from other countries, because they still have the copies that they were broadcasting back in the 60s and 70s.
So that's why we have the episodes we do have, is because of this thing you mentioned called telerecording, which is basically they didn't have any use for those original tapes, or the problem was that they did have use for the original tapes to re-record over them, but the tapes were in a format that didn't necessarily match the formats that were used around the world. So there's this process of telerecording that results in a film recording of the episode. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
You point a film recorder at a blank screen and make a film recording of it, because again, you have different formats of television around the world, and it was very difficult back in the 50s and 60s to distribute to other countries that had other formats. There weren't format conversions back then. So the easiest way to distribute was on film, because everybody could broadcast from film.
And to clarify for our chat here, they weren't recording a blank screen. They were obviously playing whatever the program was, and then recording it while pointing the camera at that screen. But good call out from Greg in our chat.
Yep. So you can't erase film. So that's why these things tend to still exist, is because it can't be reused, but you can burn it. And the BBC actually did have a policy of telling people to burn these episodes when they had finished the bicycling system around the world.
Well, again, thankfully, the fact that there were two different companies. So as these came back to Enterprises from around the world, Enterprises had gotten their copies from the BBC television department, the engineering library for the most part, and they assumed that they still had copies of all of these episodes. And if they didn't, it was no concern of Enterprises, because Enterprises, in order to sell them around the world, they had to, again, set up contracts with the actors unions and musicians unions in order to be able to sell them around the world. Those contracts were typically, although maybe not in all cases, but were typically for 5-year periods to cover certain programs. And so after 5 years, their ability to sell those programs would run out. And sometimes they would renew those. And sometimes if they thought they had gotten all the sales they could out of it, they chose not to renew them. Once Enterprises had no ability to sell the episodes anymore because all of their rights with the unions had run out, they didn't see any purpose in keeping material that they could no longer sell. So again, that led to a lot of the film prints either being destroyed or sent to, they would ask the television stations to destroy them. it just so happens then that the people at BBC Television assumed, well, we made copies of these for the enterprises, so they have all these copies, so we don't need the videotapes either. Now, there was a lot of paperwork at the time. BBC was a very paperwork-driven company, and there were things such as retention orders that came from BBC Enterprises to engineering to hold certain tapes until they could make copies. And there was also basically a release form that was sent to Enterprises saying, we have all the copies we need of this material, you can do what you want with it now. And typically engineering took that to mean, well, if Enterprises doesn't need it and we can't repeat it, they would typically then deaccession them and wipe them, the videotapes, the original videotapes. So, and it just depended on how long it took them to pass all the paperwork around and get everything in line. I mean, the very last videotapes to be wiped from 60s Doctor Who were in late 1974. Mission to the Unknown and Fury from the Deep were some of the last original videotapes to be wiped. Just 3 or 4 years shy of all of this changing and the BBC instituting a archive policy and an archive.
Yeah, so that's when you get Sue Malden. The role is created of what was she called? Archive selector, is that right?
That was the original title, yes.
Okay, so what spurs that on? Why is that role even created? Is there suddenly this? Is it just understood that there is a market for this, or is it all because Ian Levine wants to show a copy at, some convention somewhere?
Ian Levine didn't want to show copies at conventions. Ian Levine just really wanted copies for himself initially when he was purchasing from the BBC. But I think another point is that has been brought up is we got to keep in mind this isn't just Doctor Who that this is happening to, although this is to all of the television shows across the board at the BBC, and again some of the other television stations in the UK at the time. But yeah, once the archive selector, they came to realize that things are changing. We need to keep some things for cultural aspects and for other reasons, because at the time, again, there wasn't a home video market per se, but things were changing and they were beginning to see that, this might be the case in the future. We might want to repeat something. I mean, all this happened in 1977, and just around the corner from the BBC, BBC Two, broadcasting 5 Faces of Doctor Who. And they had already run into certain instances when they were trying to put together the Who's Doctor Who documentary, where they wanted certain clips and those were unavailable because they no longer had those episodes anymore. So they were starting to realize that they needed someone to decide what should be kept, and that was Sue Malden's position. And she initially started out with she wanted to do a survey and wanted a typical series, which she wanted a series that had been running for a long time. And I forget the other series that was an option, but she chose Doctor Who, for better or worse, to make her example of. And she basically started to inventory everything, then found out that the Enterprises had episodes and went to them to try and get those. And again, ran into many roadblocks along the way because they said, well, we don't care because we're Enterprises, you're from the BBC. So there was a lot of, again, red tape that she ran into with different things. But basically what it comes down to is that she used Doctor Who as this example and realized that there was some big gaps in Doctor Who's history, and from that point on started moving forward. Now, at the same time, about the same time I should say, is when Ian Levine, as you brought up, Bill, contacted the BBC with an idea of purchasing episodes on film. And he wanted to purchase the entire back catalog, which was more or less just for himself at the time. And that's when he discovered, again, with Sue's help, that there were all of these things that were missing. Eventually, he wasn't connected with Sue to start with, and eventually got connected with her and several other people, and found out that there were things at BBC Enterprises, and there famously is the day that they visited BBC Enterprises, found out that they were planning to destroy the Daleks that day, Serial B, and through basically was like just very upset that they were planning to destroy more episodes that, again, he looked at as things he wanted to purchase. So that's that. Both
I find that story interesting.
Find out that they were.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say I find that interesting because if Sue Malden's already there, she shouldn't have authorized that theoretically.
She didn't authorize any of. She didn't. She had no control over Enterprises.
Oh, that was okay. That was Enterprises. That makes sense. All right.
Again, so
who was running things over at Enterprises? They didn't have their own Sue Malden. They just had their. I suppose their system worked if they couldn't make money off it.
But again, they're just there to make money off of the episodes, and funnel that back into the BBC for more programs. It's once things were they were no longer viable to sell, they were just taking up storage space that they needed for other programs. So, but yeah, they eventually she went to the person that they contacted, famously Pamela Smith, and she said that no, that they couldn't have them, and there was again a bunch of red tape, but eventually Ian got the rights to purchase the episodes that were held at Enterprises, and also Sue was able to get the episodes that were still existing at Enterprises restored and help set up the original film and videotape library, which was the first official archive at the BBC. And again, we're talking about like not just Doctor Who, but lots of different shows. And so, I mean, she had done Doctor Who as her example series, but she was, in the midst of finding other programs and other things that Enterprises had. And then once they had done that, then they turned to looking to other countries and what they might have in their archives.
There's a really good episode for those. I'm sure some people watching this panel will have listened to it, but our friend Greg Blocken, who does From the Archive, a British television podcast, had a really great conversation with Sue Malden. So if you're interested in kind of more of her experience in her own words, I would definitely look for that episode, because it's it's a great podcast in general, but really, really good information from her in that episode.
Yes, and then I see Matt in the chat says there were some Pertwee episodes missing at this time as well. That yes, there definitely were, but I think by the end of 1978, that number is actually pretty small. They had managed to locate at least black and white copies of almost the whole thing. What was really missing was the color.
Yes, but those still counted as missing because they were missing the original broadcast versions.
Yep.
Yeah, and there was a question also earlier in the chat about sort of what was the the nadir, when was this at its worst, essentially, as far as missing episodes. And Robert, I'm sure you probably know, I know at the end of the 60s, most episodes by that point were no longer available, I think, right?
No, that's not true. I mean, a lot of the 60s episodes were still being sold around the world at the time. So more than likely copies existed. A lot of the videotapes, oddly, the videotapes, it's interesting because it seems around 1967 that engineering started to realize, hey, we need to reuse videotapes, we need to wipe videotapes, we need to have more storage. And so you find a lot of the early Troughtons were being wiped. The original videotapes are being wiped very close to, very soon to when the telerecordings were made for Enterprises. Once those telerecordings were made and Enterprises had released their hold on the episodes, a lot of those videotapes were wiped. Whereas some of the later episodes were, it took well into the 70s. Like I said, Fury from the Deep wasn't wiped until, I believe, August of 1974, same time as Mission to the Unknown. And Mission is a good example because since it was never sold around the world, that's a reason why it was never really released to be wiped, because there was the potential, hey, maybe we will need a
Right.
recording of this. They didn't realize it, because we know what the story situation is with Mission to the Unknown. To them, it was just a list, and it said, oh, it's never been telerecorded, so they just kept it.
Sure.
But yeah, eventually all the videotapes were wiped, and a lot of the telerecordings were still being sold, because, as I mentioned, there were 5-year contracts typically with the unions, and for the Hartnells, a lot of those were still being sold worldwide, even in the late 60s. So they renewed those contracts for another 5-year period, and were still selling many of those in the early 70s. So there were probably still copies, although there aren't really records as closely for the telerecordings and when they were destroyed for all of them.
Right.
Okay, so then once Sue Malden's got her initial list, and I think there's a couple of different lists that are produced in 1978. I can't claim to understand how it works, but by the end of 1978, I think that's when you get your 106 missing, something like that. And at that point, this sort of recovery period begins, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like that's the period that we can actually document that they know what they have. So that's why I think it makes it hard to find that low point, is they didn't know for sure what they had until 1978. So that's what we have to work from. And at that point, I think there's not that much Pertwee in color, but it starts coming in pretty fast. Within the next like 5 years, they've got most of it in color, I think, from Canada.
A few episodes
or from Ian.
Yes, Ian deserves a lot of credit for helping return things, even in not broadcastable formats. At the time, Ian knew that a lot of the Pertwees were still being broadcast in color in the US, and he had worked through friends in the US to make recordings of these off the air and have them sent to him. So he still, he was able to provide the BBC with those, which again later were used to recolorize many of the episodes that only exist now on black and white film. And several of the other episodes in color were returned from Canadian stations. However, there's only really a handful of those. 2, 3, and mostly season 9 story episodes. So yeah, it's. But again, then you have a conversion standard, because those episodes have been converted to NTSC, and which means a loss in resolution and judderiness because of the frame rate transfer, and so that's led to other issues when trying to restore them back to the original look of the original US or UK broadcasts. So
yeah, and I think everything you're saying about Ian Levine and getting episodes from North America just sort of highlights the tenacity of Doctor Who fans when it comes to all of these missing episodes, whether it's getting copies like you mentioned Ian doing from friends in North America whose PBS stations were showing them, or going to sort of search them out themselves, or recording the audio of episodes by either putting some sort of recording device near their TV in the 60s, or in the case of some very sort of intelligent and plucky people, directly wiring recording equipment into their TV. So in that way, Doctor Who fans are lucky, in that even the episodes that are missing, we at least have an audio record of, so we can still hear them, which is certainly not the case for every TV show that has missing episodes like that. So that's one thing we can at least be happy about, in that even if the visual record doesn't exist, we have the audio record. And for the cases where like with the Pertwee episodes, where the original color recordings, for example, were lost, black and white ones were found, or they used color recordings from North America to restore black and white film recordings. So it's the tenacity and dedication of Doctor Who fans when it comes to missing episodes is impressive, to say the least, when it comes to just continuing to make the show as available as possible. Not to mention the books, target novelizations and things like that, so we could still experience those episodes without being able to see them in their original format. So that's at least a nice win for us as fans.
Yes, but I do think that Ian himself probably needs to be singled out for
Totally.
special recognition, because in those early days he was doing a lot. And again, this is just behind the scenes, using his own money and his his own contacts to do these things that have now led to people being able to see some episodes that he just recovered outright. Some other episodes, like Ambassadors of Death, a lot of that, the color is from the NTSC recordings that he had made, or he purchased at least.
Absolutely,
from his friends. So it's fandom does owe him quite a bit, and I know that he has a very he has a very vocal
presence,
fan club. I want to say, like, online
supporters,
people dislike him, and that, but like him or hate him, I mean, we've got to give him credit for what he did do.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Robert has a cat behind him suddenly. That wasn't there a second ago.
Zach. I assume that's Zach.
Yes.
And there is also there was a comment in the chat, and again, people watching this, may have heard this, but if you haven't, absolutely seek out the book "Wiped" by Richard Molesworth. There's an original and then an updated edition, and get the updated edition because it has more information. But as we talk about everything with missing episodes, like that book "Wiped" is sort of a bible of what happened when, what was missing when, what was found when, where it was found, all that kind of stuff. So definitely a very good book to get as we talk about all this stuff. So if you come out of this panel and you're like, oh, I want to know more about how all this missing episode stuff happened, or because we didn't answer your questions adequately, which at least in the case of Bill and I is highly possible, read Wiped. It's lots of lists. So if you're sort of very type A and like to see check things off and see where things were at what time, really good for that, and just really good history about how we got where we are with missing episodes from a Doctor Who standpoint.
I couldn't agree more. I do think it's interesting that it has an updated edition, but that update is pre Phil Morris. So there's nothing about any of the there's nothing about Web of Fear and Enemy of the World in there,
which was a pretty big
when you say when you say up to date, that's up to date.
Well, not up to,
it's getting old now.
We didn't say up to date. We said updated.
Updated from the first edition.
Updated.
But you're right, not updated since the last big episode recovery.
But the Phil Morris recoveries have been highly documented online, and people can find information about those rather easily. Just the stories of some of the recoveries are interesting to read on their own, because they're just very unlikely. Finding episodes in a church basement, finding episodes that engineers had smuggled home and later found out, oh, hey, this is missing, I didn't know that, and returning them. So the stories of some of these recoveries are just as interesting. And then that leads you into, like you said, Phil Morris, who made the scene in the early 2010s, 20-teens, with talking about, became all of a sudden he just started to show up talking about missing episodes, and then returned. He returned
9 episodes?
9 episodes all at once, yes.
Which is huge.
And yes, and because those were, again, one was a complete story, one was almost complete other than one episode, and happened to be one of the most sought after Crown stories of all. Started up huge conspiracy rumors and everything online too, which we're not going to get into.
No, please. Ruben just mentioned the
look those up.
The rumor in the chat, and that's probably not worth touching. But Greg brought up a good point in the chat about how Dixon of Dot Green, another British show, has out of 436 episodes, 400 are missing. So a very high percentage of missing. And I think, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're at 97 now, not counting animations or things like that. But 97, I think, is the number we're at as of today, which is December 26th, 2020. I think that's the number we're at, isn't it?
Still, yes.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, I mean, the discoveries, although the Phil Morris, and I'm trying to remember, I believe Airlock and Underwater Menace 3 were either before or after. But before. Okay, thank you.
Well, when you say before the Omni rumor, or before
Phil Morris's return of Enemy and Web, and
they were before. Yeah.
They were like very close around the same time, I think. And but we're still having recoveries. It's just that it's not like complete episodes or episodes at all. I mean, recently we got the Power of the Daleks special edition that came out with animation, but included new clips that had previously not been seen before.
Yeah.
And just a couple of years ago, the group that Greg works with, Kaleidoscope, was instrumental in helping return some very important audio recordings, the Randolph tapes, which to date are probably, like, for the episodes that exist from those recordings, they're pretty much the highest quality version of those recordings that are available, from beginning of Dalek's Master Plan through I believe Moonbase. So
where that's concerned, one of the things that's they're just higher quality in general. I believe, I haven't heard them, but one of the things that I know Mark Ayers talked about is that one of the things about them is that they're complete for the most part. They have the beginning and end of the show. So if you're a fan and you're recording on tape, you want to save tape, you don't keep the end credits on your audio tape, and you know.
That's the thing. Not a lot of people realize this. I have met Graham Strong in the past, and he did show me the tapes that he recorded on. And you have to keep in mind, these were reel-to-reel tapes, and he would play them. Most of his episodes, I think, exist on just 3 or 4 reels. And because it wasn't economic for him as a young boy to not do that, he would often rewind the tape to the cliffhanger and then start recording, wait for the opening credits to finish and start recording. So he more or less did a kind of on the fly edit of many of his episodes to be able to fit as many as possible onto the tapes. Some of his tapes do have opening and closing credits, some for certain episodes, and some don't. Just depends on where he was on the tape and what he was doing that week. But for the most part, yes, the Randolph recordings do have all of the open and close credits, which didn't exist. So now certain things like announcements that were over the credits during Power of the Daleks, we have existing thanks to the Randolph tapes, but they are very much better quality.
Yeah, and again, there is an episode of From the Archive, the podcast we mentioned earlier, where the Randolph tapes are specifically discussed, and you hear little bits from them as well. So yeah, definitely a nice find. And I think, again, that's as we think about the tenacity of Doctor Who fans and what you kind of mentioned this earlier, Robert, but like what missing episode finds represent today. It could just be unseen clips that were film trims, or the Randolph tapes. So we already had audio of all the episodes, but now we have better audio that includes cliffhangers that maybe wasn't included in audio that we had before. So as we look at whether it's new audio releases or the current Blu-ray collection sets that are coming out, there'll be better audio sources for those releases. And we haven't really even touched on, other than mentioning briefly, reconstructions and the important role that audios play in those. So we just continue to again, for a show that started in 1963 and has been missing many episodes at various points, the fact that we still have audio representation and reconstructions and animations, which we also haven't touched on yet, but like we have all these visual or we have all these representations of the episodes to enjoy, and fans of other series certainly aren't quite as lucky in that regard.
Well, before you get into discussing that, I think it's worth pointing out that even though these Randolph tape recordings were recovered a couple of years ago, and I don't believe Mark has publicly if he's used any of the material in any of the actual releases. So I don't think that they've actually been included in anything that has been released to
Yeah,
date.
I don't think they have yet either, but hopefully they will be at some point in the future when we get to
When there's an appropriate project, because I mean he's already put a bunch of work into cleaning up.
We have someone on the chat who's challenging this notion already. We have a Greg. Is it Bakken?
Bacon.
Yeah, what did he say?
I didn't know that Mark had said that he used any of the Randolph material in the Power re-release. So if Greg is saying that Mark has said that publicly, then there's some of that. But I don't believe that. I mean, I don't know publicly what Mark has said that may have been used so far. I know that the audio at the end of the episodes with the voiceovers, part of that was used, but I don't know if he used any of the actual episode, if he replaced any of the material in the episodes themselves. So,
well, that's what Greg just wrote here. Greg, do you want to come off mute and and say it, or you want me to read it?
No, I can just come on real fast. Yeah, I mean, Robert, you're right. It's not. If he used it in the actual episodes himself in the animation, that is unclear, but we do know that he has used it in the release. So it's been used in there. What's kind of frustrating about it is that, as you know, and as if a lot of people know, and we don't have the trained ears per se, but we know what we hear, that since the tapes have come out, Mark has had kind of a turnabout in what he thinks the quality of them are. Like he kind of is saying like, oh, well, they're not as good as Graham's. We know that's not to be the case. They are exceptional. They are an amazing wealth of recordings. But I do think that they may have been used in some of that, but certainly in some of the extras, as Robert has pointed out.
Yeah. If anything, one of the things that's probably unique with the Randolphs and why they may sound slightly better than some of Graham's material is because for years, Graham was making copies for a lot of friends and a lot of people in fandom, and his tapes have been played over and over and over again. And we don't know anything about the history of these Randolph tapes. They were found in a garbage skip by someone, so we don't know who recorded them or anything to do with how they were recorded. They don't appear to be recorded through a microphone. Appears to be, someone that had, again, similar to Graham, connected his recording device directly to the television. But there's a lot of, other than listening to it and making out what you can hear, there isn't information that you can gain from it. But
so it was found in a garbage skip,
especially season 3 episodes. His episodes are much higher quality than Graham's.
So it was found in a garbage skip, and it just said Randolph on it, right?
Yeah, on the front.
So that's why they're called the Randolph tapes, is because that's it says that on it. Yes. We have no idea who did it or how.
No.
Okay.
No.
There you go.
So although this person that did do it was very meticulous, because there are lists on each box stating, this is the episodes that are on this tape. So very meticulously laid out. And as we said, and when we talk about the fact that that it includes the open and closed credits, this person almost in each instance started the recording at the very beginning beats of the credit music and stopped recording at the very end of the closing credit music. There's not a lot of extraneous announcements around. I think there are a couple on there, but there's not a lot.
So I see Matt's got something in the chat about a rumor, asking whether the rumor is true that at least a couple of known episodes not yet returned are in private collectors' hands. Well, I think as far as rumors go, we've gotten all but official confirmation on that. Paul Vanessa said it on a podcast that wasn't Greg's podcast.
It doesn't matter.
Was it Radio Free Scar?
It's a rumor. There's no way to say anything is true. It's a rumor.
I suppose that's true. Yeah. So is the rumor true? Well, yeah, it's a rumor, but it's probably true.
We'll know when we see him. Yeah, or if we see.
Well, that's true too. Yeah.
Very likely.
That's true too.
cannot say that something is true unless you absolutely know it. So, but
Right.
there are lots of rumors out there, some of them much more credible. We can have an entire hour's discussion about all of those. So I don't think that this is the panel to do that. But you wanted to get into, I think, Jeff, and you might be a good person to talk about this specifically, how, I brought this up earlier. We were discussing this via text earlier this week, and the fact that, fans just won't let these episodes stay missing. We have people like, Ian Levine and Phil Morris, fans that were out there trying to return episodes, but recover the actual episodes. But there are many other ways that fans are recreating them, all the way through reconstructions and animations. And I believe in almost all cases, a lot of these animation teams that have worked on various animations have always been fans themselves. So I think it's always goes back to like it's fans just wanting to help return this history to Doctor Who.
I especially when you mentioned before, like Graham Strong and whoever made the Randolph tapes, these fans that are taping stuff off the TV, it was question. There was some question as late as the 70s and 80s about the legality of even owning a VCR and recording stuff off the air. Like the fact that these fans were doing this was probably not even appreciated, wouldn't have been appreciated by the BBC if they'd known about it. So that's sort of how intrepid I think it was. And like you said, Graham Strong making copies for all his friends. I'm guessing that wasn't, I guess no one cared because they couldn't make any money off it. But
well, this isn't about people making money, but yeah, it's. But we've all heard there were rumors that turned out to be true, that there were some early videotape recordings made of Doctor Who, and the unofficial restoration team reached out, talked to this person, found the material, and it ended up being a very early video recording of Space Pirates 2, which already exists on film. So it didn't help in that aspect, but it proved that people were out there trying to do this. And you also have people like Bob Monkhouse in the UK, who he wasn't necessarily a big Doctor Who fan, but he was a film collector, and he liked a lot of things, and he made a lot of recordings himself, both audio, video, film prints, buying film prints. His house was just full of material when he passed away that has since moved on to various archives, and I'm not even sure if they've finished going through all of it to find out exactly what was there. But a lot of missing material was found through his collection and other things. But it proves that there were other people out there that were probably doing this too.
So again, Greg, in the chat, that lead you're talking about, that's the one that Robert was talking about with Space Pirates? Is that the one you're referring to there? Come off mute again, Greg.
So there are two groups that are currently been working on, and it's not very well known, trying to create the type of machines that will play back their computer data tapes that were sliced in downward to become half-inch tapes, or were they quarter-inch tapes? And it's Phil Morris and Kaleidoscope, each working on their own projects, because none of those tapes that still have that information on it have not been thrown out. They've been kept. So it is kind of a project that has been ongoing to see if they can actually get those playable.
That's great.
Yeah, I was only referring to the one that had been played to at least know that it was
right. But my understanding is that this person who had a lot more, they've taken all those back to see if there's a way that they can go back to those tapes and see what's on them.
Let's hope they're not all Space Pirates Part 2.
Very doubtful, because I doubt he was recording that across many tapes.
That's true.
But it leads into the discussion of again, if you can't recover the episodes, the next best thing you can do is make them enjoyable for other fans through other various means. We talked about audio recordings, and originally the BBC wasn't interested in the audio recordings when Graham reached out to them. That has since changed, and I think it's similar for other things that in the archive they're not necessarily interested in, or weren't originally interested in audio recordings. That's not necessarily the case for missing material from other shows now too. But the those audio recordings have all now been cleaned up by Mark Ayers, released on originally cassettes and CDs, and now on albums with linking narration. Because they're no longer visual, and that led to other fan projects. You want to talk about that, Jeff?
Well, I mean, you know, our first, I think, and again, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the first animated episode was it was Reign of Terror, wasn't it? The two missing episodes of Reign of Terror, I think, were the first ones released.
The Invasion.
You're talking BBC animations. That's not
Yeah.
the first animated episode.
Oh, true. Yes. I'm not as familiar with the Bill. I don't know if you still have those the things we were talking about earlier this week, but you know, the sort of animated episodes that predated the official releases. You're right, it was The Invasion. I was just referencing a list here. The Invasion was the first officially released, and again, that's an 8-episode story that had 2 missing episodes. So I think there was, you know, a desire to see how that could work. I think it still stands up pretty well myself. Those 2 animated episodes from
Reign of Terror?
No,
Invasion.
Oh, Invasion. Okay.
Well, the thing with The Invasion was that company was employed to animate something else. Was it? I can't remember which one it was. Was it the?
They're originally going to make another animation. It's the same company that made the
Scream of the Shalka.
The Scream of the Shalka, and they were going to make a similar animation. The budget had been set aside when word came down that a new series of Doctor Who might be on the way, and it might not be best to go down the path of that particular strain of Doctor Who. But they still had the budget that had been set aside, and they went back to the company and said, hey, instead of doing that, can you use this to remake these episodes? And that was the first official BBC sanctioned release. Again, this is all for BBC I, the online web space. So these episodes were not originally created to be released on DVD. And later, again, because the contracts were completely different, they had to go back and renegotiate with the company to make the DVD release and that. But I think that came a few years later. So.
Yeah, and you know, even before the animations, we had just talking in the chat here about the fan reconstructions, which, you know, Robert, you are intimately familiar with, and I don't even know, you know, when the first reconstruction happened, but you know, from photos, from telesnaps, you know, pictures of what was happening on screen, you know, fans over the years have recreated, I think, every missing episode, right? I don't think there's any that have never had a reconstruction.
Yes, all of the missing episodes have a reconstruction, at least by loose cannon.
Yeah.
Many of the others, I think the very first reconstruction, although we've never been able to track down the date, it's from the late 80s or early 90s. By a gentleman, I don't remember his last name, but his first name was Gary. He didn't really want to be recognized. His name isn't on it. This was reconstructing all 6 episodes of The Power of the Daleks. And which is initially what led to me being involved in reconstructions, because through fan networks, I got a copy of that and was amazed and thought, what a great idea. And then, of course, in the early 90s, there was the discovery of all of the other telesnaps, and Doctor Who magazine started to publish these. And it became like, well, if you can get the audio and you can get these telesnaps together. And we really haven't discussed telesnaps. I mean, you were talking about BBC was unsure about home video recordings and who actually owned and if it was legal to do a home video recording, which I think originally under, and I don't know about the US, but I've heard under the UK laws, it technically was wasn't legal, but that was changed later, obviously, as the but the but yeah, and the whole thing came up when John Cura started. He had retired. He was a photographer and liked to work on televisions. Well, he did televisions and photos. His day-to-day job was working on television repair. But after he had retired, he set up a photo studio and was taking photos off of his television screen. And he tried to sell these to the BBC, and there were lots of memos back and forth about whether that was even legal, because they were saying they own the copyright to the video, the pictures. Eventually, the BBC started to publish his photos in Ariel, their internal magazine, and did offer him basically the Ariel basically gave him copyright on the photos, but there was lots of discussion about who actually owned that at the time. He never tried to really do anything other than he was selling these to the people that were involved with the episodes, the television shows, to sell them as some way, because since they couldn't take around videotapes again to show people this is the body of work I've done, they could take around these photos and show to people. I directed this serial, and this is an example of how I direct.
Yeah.
And thankfully for Doctor Who, the production office had them budgeted for quite a while, and at least one volume of these still exist in the Written Archive Center, and give us a lot of visual representation for many of the stories that are still missing. And marrying those up with the audio tracks just seemed like an obvious solution.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and those Greg just said here in the chat, what a big find even telesnaps were, and again, reconstructions. Kind of amazing that there was this sort of organically fan grown effort to create these reconstructions and distribute them for free, using hubs around different parts of the world. You send blank tapes to me, I'll send you copies of these reconstructions. People weren't making money on them, and again, just the ingenuity of fans to make missing Doctor Who available, however it could be, and that continues to this day with as new releases are done of episodes that are animated, which we touched on earlier. We've got the missing episode 3 of Web of Fear being animated and released next year, and we've recently had Fury from the Deep and the Faceless Ones and stories like that, and they're on disc, coming with these professionally done reconstructions or updates to reconstructions, and it's just amazing to see, because a lot of fans would love to see the animation, and that's great. Other fans maybe prefer to see the reconstruction because maybe they feel it's closer to what the story would have at least felt like, because you're seeing telesnaps or photos from the actual production. So I think it's great that they continue to as they do these physical media releases, they continue to offer reconstructions as part of them, and I hope that continues as they release new animations. So
well, a couple of points on that. Basically, we need to also remember that even the discovery of the telesnaps was thanks to fans going into the BBC's Written Archive Center. Marcus Hearn and Stephen James Walker both discovering them pretty much around the same time, and getting the information out to other fans. Of course, Marcus Hearn was working for the Doctor Who magazine at the time, and that was a very obvious way to get them out to fandom quickly. So, but going back to your point, the reconstructions, and I don't think a lot of people necessarily realize this, but I'm not sure, the exact details. I don't put them up and try to find out exactly what's missing, but quite often the audios for the animated episodes are edited slightly to help the animation flow smoother for various reasons, and but quite often those edits aren't then copied over. So sometimes the episodes are the reconstructed episodes on those Blu-ray and DVD releases are more complete audio wise than the animations.
All right. Well, we're getting down to the end here. If anybody's
Yeah.
got any questions, if you want to come off mute and ask any questions, we will try.
Yeah.
See a bunch of Matt has one.
Hey, just a quick question.
Yeah.
What season do you think would most likely be released on Blu-ray first, given that all of seasons 1 through 6 have some missing episodes?
So which of 1 through 6 is most likely to come out first in the Blu-ray collection? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, in terms of what you all think.
It's a really good question. I mean, I would personally get season 2 because there's not much missing from it. But I'd love to know what other people think.
The thing is if the question is how much of it is missing, that I don't know if that's as interesting a question as what we'd rather see. I don't know. Because there used to be a lot missing from season 5, and then what with animations and recoveries,
Yeah.
we had DVD releases of Enemy of the World, Web of Fear, and Ice Warriors come out within a really short period of time, and I don't know. That's a good season, so I'll buy it, whatever it is, I guess.
True. Yeah, I think we're a little spoiled for choice when it comes. And yeah, there's Greg just said in the chat another Web of Fear release next year with the, as I mentioned earlier, the newly animated episode 3, which as Robert said at the beginning of this panel, when that was returned, those episodes were returned. Episode 3 was missing from that, so they're going to animate it. So yeah, I mean, I'll buy all those single releases, Fury from the Deep and everything as they're animated, and then I'll buy them again on the collection, whatever. We don't even know yet what format they'll take on the collection, if they'll go with, because they come out in black and white animation, color animation, reconstruction, and what's going to be represented on the collection yet for those seasons is still TBD, because none of them have come out yet. So Robert, what do you think? What would you want to see first from seasons 1 through 6 in the collection?
Well, it's all just a guess, so I
Yeah.
can't really say. I mean, yeah, it's not something I'm, that I would guess at here. I mean, that's really beyond the remit of this particular panel. That's more of a video releases panel.
Well, the other thing was when the Blu-ray releases started coming out, it seemed as if there was some thought put into, season 19 was one of the first seasons to come out, and I guess I thought it was partly because they had so much film, so they were going to have the actual film from the episode, so they could have actual HD footage in the episode. But I don't know if that's true or not. Again, I have no idea. It's just it seemed like, how much work is it going to take to put into it seems to be part of this, but it might not be, right? They might be looking at marketability too.
Totally.
Well, it's, early on they weren't sure, probably how these were going to sell when, season 19 being the, and I don't know what necessarily order they were commissioned in, but it was definitely one of the earlier ones. So they didn't know how well these were going to sell. So it might be it was probably a case of, you're right, we have more material to make this look good on Blu-ray. Now it's probably more a matter, now that it seems that they've decided, we're definitely going to do all of the seasons this way. It's more of a matter of they just kind of want to juggle things so they don't end up with a end of the universe type situation where they're releasing, that's why I have a feeling we're going to get some of the black and white seasons sooner rather than later, because they're not going to want to leave them all to the end.
Right. I agree with that.
Any questions in the chat, Jeff?
Yeah, Felicity just asked a perennial favorite, I think, for missing episodes. Which one would we most want to see returned if we had a magic lamp?
Or a magic stone from Wonder Woman.
Or yes, or that. Any sort of magic object or abilities. So Bill, what would yours be?
I always say the same thing. I always say the Myth Makers, but the Myth Makers actually is in pretty good shape the way it is. It's a good got some snappy dialogue that works fine as an audio or as a reconstruction. So I'm just gonna say 10th Planet episode 4 because we all want to see it.
Yeah. Robert, what about you?
Why not Myth Makers? And it will sound very cliched, but as you mentioned, I've worked on several reconstructions in the past, and I am intimately familiar with Power of the Daleks, and I really want to see how some of those scenes were done, how they were shot. Recently, this is another thing that we didn't even discuss, but photos. The Power of the Daleks special edition Blu-ray that just came out included new photos showing that Hensel's office had like this yellow background. It was like, this is, we're still discovering things about these episodes that were recorded over 50 years ago that we just never knew. And those photos are stunning. So I just want to know more about that show, just because I know those episodes inside and out. And I know that I'm going to find out more if I were ever able to see them.
Yeah, I think.
Cool. By my clock, we're over an hour. So Jeff, you go ahead and answer the question, and we'll finish with that.
I love what both of you. I would love to see the Mythmakers. I would love to see. I really like Vicky as a character, and would love to see her. Her farewell at the end of that. Plus, it's just sort of a unique story that, to your point, Bill, does works well in what we have, like on audio. But I would love to see it. And Robert, we have, because we have great reconstructions, we have great animation, we have even 2 animated releases with the special edition that just came out of Power of Dog. So I would love to see how those compare to the real thing. So yeah, I'd be happy to get all of those episodes back, both of those stories. Really anything, which is another sort of cliched answer, but like anytime when we've had like the releases or the recoveries from Phil Morris several years ago, like that was just magic to me. So if we got a single episode back, a full story, all 97, like I would be 100% down for it. But in the meantime, I am happy to have the ability to experience them through the new animations and things like that are coming out. So I'm just glad that especially as a physical media collector, like I love the fact that there is still physical media Doctor Who to collect. So I hope that whether through returning missing episodes or animating those missing episodes, that we just continue to have new ways to experience all these classics.
And if I had to amend my story, I actually think that I might prefer if we could have returned the pilot episode recording for the Peter Cushing radio series that never happened.
That's a deep cut, but that would be really cool to hear.
Hey, we got Shada, so why not? We got Shada like 6 times. Why not?
Why not once for that one? Yeah, that's true. And it's Greg saying that it has to be out there. Someone has to have it.
It has to be. What is it? Expect the unexpected? No, what's the line?
That's Big Brother.
Doesn't matter. Oh. All right. Well, thanks for attending. Thanks for watching the panel, and enjoy the other fine console room virtual material. Robert, you got something to say?
Well, I was going to say, since this will be hosted on YouTube at some point, down in the comments, everybody else should put down the episodes that they would want to see returned to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And we'll work on finding them for you. Or Bill will.
Yeah, make a numbered list in order. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, email them.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Thanks.